Hi, I'm Natalie Perry. I'm a partner at Ice Miller. I'm in the Trust and Estates group. I'm going to talk a little bit today about business succession planning, which can mean a variety of things depending on the circumstances of the family and the company. So turning to some of the initial steps that we often consider in succession planning, and I'm going to speak really high level right now on the topic of planning because it really does depend, I can't emphasize that enough, kind of on the individual family, your circumstances, the circumstances of the business, and your goals, the business's goals, where you see the business. So these are some general guidelines. They may not necessarily apply to your particular situation, but these are some things that you should think about as you're going through the process or as you consider starting the process with some advisors. First thing people often want to think about is what is going to be required to keep the business going, because that's usually the number one priority. The whole point of planning for succession of an owner is to keep the business intact. Generally, we don't want the business lost because of lack of liquidity or failure to have a successor to step in the event a transition suddenly becomes necessary. We don't want any important managers to leave. We want employees to feel comfortable. So all those things are very important to keep in mind. There are several ways to transition a business depending on the goals of the family and the business owner. The business might stay in the family. Perhaps there's one child or a key employee who's going to take over the business, probably someone at the manager level. There may be a liquidation at death, there may be no clear successor, the business may really depend on the owner itself, and there just may not be someone who could take it over, but it may be marketable and you may be able to sell the business at the death of the owner to raise cash for the family who's left behind. You may also want to sell your business to a third party, either during lifetime or as you retire, as you get to the retirement age, it may be time to step back, enjoy life a little bit more, and reap the rewards of everything that you've worked for that so far. Thinking about who the successors should be can also be a challenge for most business owners. A lot of times there isn't one clear successor. Even if a child of the business owner is involved in the business directly, he or she may be too young or too inexperienced to really be a clear successor. So this is really an ongoing process for families and business owners. What may look right today may not look right in 5 years. It's going to be kind of an evolving process as things go forward and as the family situation changes and as everyone gets older. Another thing to think about as you're planning for succession is your estate planning goals and your goals for your wealth. If a lot of your wealth is tied up in your business currently, as most business owners' wealth is, what other assets are available to live off of if the business isn't going to be sold? Should there be gifts made of shares? How will that impact the other family members? How will that impact the owner and the owner's spouse? How will they continue to live? So that can have kind of a financial planning bent in addition to the estate and succession planning piece. So another thing to think about as you're planning to exit the business is what's important to the family and the business as well. I work closely with a client now who's very concerned about his customers and what his customers will think about his transition. He's already in his late 70s. His son has been very involved in the company at a high level for quite a while, and he knows his business will pass to his son, but he's very concerned about what his customers will think of the transition. So he is going to go out, meet with all his customers, and really explain his transition process to them, because his highest value is his customers and what they think about how this business will be ongoing in the future. Another thing to think about, turning to the estate planning goals, is the rest of the family and how a transition is going to impact the rest of the family. And this can include a surviving spouse. If the business owner passes away, what will she live on if the business isn't sold? Will there be some kind of liquidity event? How will the spouse get an income from the company in some way? Can that be set up? Because if you were getting an income from the company and that stops when you pass away, how will your spouse meet her retirement needs? And this is, again, getting back to more the financial planning piece that needs to be part of the multifaceted succession planning process. You also may want to think about your children who are not in the business. Are there any special concerns with them? If they inherit a large chunk of money, What should that look like? For some children, it might be okay to get a large chunk of money soon after someone passes away. For other children, that may not be the right answer. There may need to be a trust established with a third-party successor trustee. The child may be a co-trustee, the child may not be, really depending on that child. There's a lot of things to think about and talk through with your advisors as you think about how your family will kind of evolve in the process of exiting the business or upon a transition such as a death in the family. As part of that, you're going to think about your business ownership structure. Do you have shareholder agreements in place? Do you have employment agreements in place? Sometimes when a business owner steps back, they might enter into a consulting agreement where they stay on in a consulting capacity, but they aren't taking a salary like they were before. Perhaps they're going to keep their shares and they're not going to be completely cashed out if gifts are made to a son. Perhaps the business owner will stay as a minority owner in the company but won't completely divest himself of his shares. Then there may need to be a shareholder agreement. What happens if someone dies unexpectedly? What happens if someone wants to buy the company? Does everyone need to agree? Then you want to think about the determination of the ownership that is going to be transitioned. And perhaps it needs to be valued in order to properly evaluate what kind of transition should occur. You may need to obtain a business valuation. That may be a useful way to establish the value, even if there isn't a sale, if you're doing some gifting, or if you're talking about a shareholder agreement where someone's going to buy someone else's shares. What price should you use? Should it be fair market value? Another thing relating to the estate planning, you may need to create some trusts or perhaps form some new entities. Sometimes an LLC can be used as a kind of holding company where shares are put in the LLC. The LLC itself can be used then for minority interest gifts. Sometimes an LLC is used to hold real estate. Business owners have a tendency to hold real estate individually, which doesn't always make sense. An LLC can be created for the real estate, and then there can be a lease between the LLC and the business. So turning to the implementation of this plan, now you've gone through this whole process, you've thought about what your succession will look like, when it will occur, or if you're not sure of those things, you're perhaps setting out some maybe 3-year or 5-year goals, maybe a timeline. You're thinking about what it's going to look like, even if today is not the day for the succession to actually take place. A good thing to do is collaborate with all of your advisors. As attorneys, we often like to involve the accountants. They have a lot of different perspective on the business than we will. They'll be able to help us with the tax issues where we may not know all the details of the business or how the business is set up for tax purposes. So it can be very useful to involve everyone in the process. We may need to retitle assets to new entities. So now that we've got our plan in place, we've created a new trust, we've created an LLC, do we need to retitle assets such as real estate? Do we need to move some shares into a trust or into an LLC that's going to be a vehicle for later gifting or planning? Some final considerations that you should keep in mind as you're going through the process are tax and liquidity issues. And the liquidity kind of ties back into that financial planning piece that I had mentioned. If you are not selling the company, you need to be thinking about retirement. Do you need to buy some insurance? That can be a way to fund a purchase of a business or a cross-purchase agreement between shareholders if there isn't a clear third party that's going to be the buyer. You may want to have family and management meetings to talk about some of these issues. Some business owners are really open with their employees about what's going to happen and when. Employees might have started to ask questions. Some people don't want to share any of that information. But as attorneys, we can help you through that process and talk about what we've seen and how it's worked for other people. And then as time passes, you may change your decision. Things may change with your family. Children who look very promising can end up looking less promising as time goes by, or children can just the newer generation can get kind of burned out, decide this isn't what they want to do. They don't want to work that hard. It's hard to predict, and things change rapidly in families, especially with family businesses where it's a very intense environment and people are together quite a lot, making important decisions. We often encourage clients to educate the next generation about the wealth, and that may not, or the wealth, that may arise from a transition. And that may not be, again, something that you do today, but it's something to think about as you're doing your planning and thinking about how things are going to look in the future. Some children are going to be very receptive to what's going to happen and when and how that's going to look. other children probably don't need to know until the money is coming their way directly, and it's better just to keep them out of the process. And finally, you want to look at your tax implications of when you sell the business, is that going to be a tax issue? How much tax are you going to have to plan for? Who's going to pay that? Can you do any pre-transaction planning to minimize capital gains tax? Lots of times we can move shares into a trust or into some gifting vehicle at a lower value before there's a letter of intent. So it's important to talk to someone if you're thinking about selling so that we can address those issues ahead of time. So on my last slide, I put these ideas and concepts kind of on a matrix, and I like to go over this with people when I talk about succession planning. It's kind of all laid out. You can see some initial steps, the estate planning goals that can tie into the initial steps. It's a really multifaceted process, and it's important to think through all these different issues. It can be very helpful to involve your advisors in the process, because lots of us have seen many of these things, from the good, the bad, to we wish we would have done it differently, or we wish we would have known this. So this slide is a great slide to kind of take a look at, see if anything really resonates with you on how you can start planning for your succession and how we can be helpful. And finally, I've included my contact information at Ice Miller, and I'd be happy to speak with you more about any of these issues or questions that you might have. Thanks.